I'll start this off by saying I'm really sorry to burst your bubble. But in this video, I want to talk about some truths that not a lot of people talk about, and also some lies that we've been told and keep telling ourselves about our favorite houseplants. If you're interested, stick around and let's dive into it. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yeah, like I said, I'm probably going to end up bursting a few bubbles here, but let's kind of talk a bit more about what I want to dive into today. There's a few things that we all assume are kind of true and they're false. And some people have realized this and others have not yet, but they're going through the realization as we speak. And there's also some realities that not a lot of people are kind of aware or are talking about. Those are the things that I want to look at in a bit more detail in this video. So tell me if this looks familiar to you. It's just like, oh, look at my lovely plant. Oh, there's a pest there. Oh, I need to deal with the pest. And note that I just touched the pest. Or like, I'm looking at the pest and there's obviously some spider mites, and without me noticing it, some of those spider mites might be dropping onto my hands, onto myself, all of these things. Same thing goes with thrips. Now, this is the first kind of truth that might shock you. You've got your plants, you're looking at them, as I said, you're kind of looking, you're doing the right thing. You're doing all of your pest checks when you're meant to be doing them during like your care of them, or even when you're kind of walking around and having a look at your plants and just going, ooh, that's interesting. Like, I need to deal with that right now. Anybody guess what the truth is going to be? So one of the reasons why your plants get pests, and this might kind of like frustrate some people, is you. And not because of the care that you're giving it. Yes, that could also be a reason why the plant gets pests. You might have bought it and not kind of like isolated it when you've brought it into your conditions. Guilty as charged. But there is also you being a good plant parent and actually checking your plant for pests. Guess what happens? Those pests end up on your hand, end up on you. You might not see them. This is the reason why every time like I'm anywhere near anything like thrips, I don't stress out about thrips as much as I used to, but I got like dark, thick hair, and it's just like all I can think of is like those things crawling in my hair, and I just want to rip my scalp off. But and even as I said that now, it was like, but it is one of those things that you end up becoming a carrier for pests. Same thing goes with mealybugs. I don't know if anybody has noticed, but with mealybugs, because of the way that they kind of grow, if you ever kind of looked at one under the microscope, you might notice that there's like a little dome, and underneath it there's thousands, hundreds or thousands of baby mealybugs that you probably cannot see with the naked eye, which means you wouldn't see it on your person. And the reason why I thought I'd kind of like share with this is because I think a lot of my American viewers might kind of finally feel vindicated with this. I have finally had one plant, luckily it's not in here, which is separate in a separate condition. I'm trying to decide what I'm going to do with it now, that has got scale. I have never in my entire life of growing houseplants had to deal with scale. They're annoying. I get why so many people are frustrated with them. Anybody got any tips? I don't know what to do with scales. At the moment, I'm just like picking them off, basically. But they end up everywhere. Spider mites are the same. They're tiny. Granted, spider mites don't move that fast. But if you've got them on you, they could be fast enough if you're kind of like, it's on the back of my hand and I somehow graze another plant. Guess what I have just done? I have moved spider mites from one place of the house to another place of the house. Now, I'm not telling you all to start wearing hazmat suits. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying be cognizant that you are not one of the main causes for pest spreading in your household and in your houseplant collection, because you're just sitting there going, how did that one pest end up from there, like in an entirely different room in here? It probably hitched a ride on you. Sorry to tell you this. It's not always the case, but it probably hitched a ride on you. And there's a reason. I used to say this with like a really, really good planty friend. Whenever we'd go to the allotments here, especially in the summer, there are basically what in the UK is called a thunderbug, essentially thrips, everywhere. And they are literally flying all over you and around you. So we were always joking. I thought I was the only one, but apparently she does the same thing. We will get home from something like an allotment or being out in the garden and quite literally strip and jump in the shower to basically wash away any of the pests. I know this is a bit extreme, and I appreciate it, and I will take the weird label. I have worn that weird label for most of my life. But we want to get it off before we go anywhere near our houseplants, because that would just be annoying, right? Like, as long as you can control it, why would you not? What I'm saying is be cognizant. If you can, there are certain things that you could do to potentially limit all of this. So if you see pests, no touchy. And if it is pests that if you do this and they kind of fly all over the place, don't shaky either. Just be cognizant and try to limit yourself being a pest carrier to your other houseplant as much as possible. Is it something that you're going to be able to wipe out entirely? Probably not. But be cognizant of it. The next thing I want to talk about is the notion of one size fits all. And I'm using the plant in front of me as an example. So this is a Monstera albo Adansonii variegata, I think. And I'll bring it in so you might be able to see it a bit closer. And if you want me to talk a bit more about this, let me know and I can add it into my next month's update. But this is a plant that has had a lot of controversy around it. And I will clarify this by saying that I got this at a very, very, very stupidly cheap price, so which I was happy to pay for. But the thing that it just doesn't hold true about most things in houseplants is that one size fits all. My care might not be the same as your care. My conditions are probably not the same as your conditions. My care are not the same as your care. So how would kind of advice that you get from me or anybody else work 100% in your space? It won't. One size fits all doesn't exist when it comes to houseplants. Some people have said, and I've actually grown the yellow variegated version of this, and it grew, and it's still growing like rubbish. This one is doing fine. This one I've put on a moss pole. That one hasn't got a moss pole. Like, you might be able to figure out why things are happening differently than what you would be expecting. But at the same time, it's not all going to be the same. So that's why a lot of the times when you're kind of looking at advice online, whether it's from somebody like me on YouTube or Instagram or by going onto websites, and you see the same thing over and over again. And I'm going to touch on bright indirect light in another section of this video, but that's a good example as well. Or the how often you should fertilize. These are general rules of thumb, especially if you're looking at a commercial website, because at the same time, they just need to kind of give you some advice as to like what you need to do in order for it to be happy enough that you don't kill it and then complain to them. Yeah? But the reality is one size fits all isn't true. The same thing goes for plants in every aspect, not just for the care. So somebody might tell you this plant is 100% this and it will 100% do this, and you get it and you're just like, it's not doing that for me. Natural like variation is a thing. So yes, by and large, plant A might do this on a regular basis for most people, and then you get a plant and just like, mine isn't doing that, and it's just like, I'm sorry to tell you, maybe you got a bum one. It's the same thing that, I know this is going to be a very stretched example, but just because everybody that people generally will have, for instance, 20/20 vision or kind of perfect eyesight, doesn't mean that people with kind of eyesight problems don't exist. one size fits all doesn't fit in nature. Things are gonna have variations amongst themselves for reasons. Either it's their kind of environment, or it could also be genetic as well. So try not to get too hung up on things that you know are 100% true. Use it as a guide of kind of generally what people's experiences are, and kind of pick and choose. So I'll give you an example. If you're looking at care and you look at several different sources and people like myself on YouTube or Instagram, and kind of more individuals rather than the businesses that are trying to sell you the plants, because they are going to be generic. But people like us, if you see like content after content after content, and they're all pretty much saying the same thing, and you're seeing happy plants, go for it. You might even then notice variations, and it's just like, oh, this person, they're saying the same thing, but not exactly the same thing. See, one size fits all doesn't always fit, but get a consensus and go from there. I had a very good friend who is now, I think, a diplomat, ironically enough, which is very cool, which is what the friend wanted to do. Very heavily into history, and we were talking about history, and he was actually saying the way that he would study history, which kind of blew my mind a bit when you think about it in this way. And he's just like, history, depending on where you are, is written by both the winners and the losers. Read both, and read a third external party's history at the same time. So if there's a war that's happened between country A and country B, read the history of country A, read the history of country B, and find country C's history that had nothing to do with that war directly, and see what they say. And after all of that, you will probably come to an approximation of what the actual facts were. Same thing. Do multiple kind of informational points, and then you'll, in your own brain, you'll be able to make those connections and just go, yeah, it's probably somewhere around here. That's good enough for me to kind of get going, essentially. And I mentioned this a moment ago, but let's talk about it as I'm getting like, as the light levels are changing in here. It's very appropriate. Bright indirect light. As somebody said in one of my previous videos, I think the comment was somewhere along the lines, it's the most useless thing that you will see on a plant care label. There is good reason for this. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not correct in a way that, yes, bright indirect light and bright indirect light, but you just need to realize what that means in the reality of houseplants specifically, tropic houseplants that I was going to talk about generally. They're in the jungle, there is a canopy of, so there's the kind of branches and leaves of the trees above them, then they're getting filtered light. That is bright indirect light. And there's really good, in my experience, if you really don't want to delve too much into it, kind of anecdotes out there that you can see, certain, not memes, but kind of graphics that you can find where it says, okay, the window's there, like right by the window, through a net curtain is bright indirect light, further back is medium light, and very small further back is low light. That is probably going to be more accurate. I think the other one that I've seen is if you can read a book easily in that location without needing assistance of a light, that is bright indirect light, or something along those lines. So it's good enough. If your eyes can see, that's fine. But reality is, just what we see a lot of the times, our eyes will lie to us. There's certain bits of anybody's house, if you look at it and just go, oh, yeah, it's got light here, I can see there's light, it's bright. It's not a dark, dingy corner. You literally think bright indirect light might mean that it's getting just some light. But use something like, they're not 100% accurate, but use your phone. You can download free apps that are called light meter apps, and just place it in that area, place it close to the window, see what reading it does, which is going to be relatively high, and then place it somewhere where you think is correct. And you're just like, oh, I went from like 2, 3, 4, 500, whatever the measurement is that you're looking at. It could be foot candles, it could be lux. And you go to the location, it's just like, oh, it's a 2 or a 1. Yes, maybe not. So that's another thing. The other one that I think is really quite cool that people say is if your plant can see the sun through a window, that is good. Like if you're seeing it, if it's seeing it all the time, that is bright light, and that would be your cactuses and succulents. But bright indirect light is really, especially if you're first starting off, and this is what grinds my nerves, is that this is advice that they give people when they're first starting off who do not understand the nuances of all of this, and it is such a shame because to a certain point they are being set up for failure because it is more nuanced than just, you know, put it by somewhere where you think is a bright light location and it should be fine. Bright indirect light isn't fantastic. Now, am I saying that everybody is going to end up getting like professional light meters and all these things? No. It's a shame, especially if you're doing the kind of houseplant collections, if you haven't at least dabbled a bit to kind of understand it a bit more. But yeah, I mean, if it was as commonplace as having one of the social media apps on your phone and everybody had it and you could do this, you wouldn't need bright indirect light. The sellers would just kind of say, you know what, use that app that everybody has and just take a meter reading. It needs to be within this range. So much better. So much better. All right, and coming on to, not a lie necessarily, but an untruth that you kind of immediately would assume. Could you have guessed that I was going to bring Calatheas into this? I know, but I kind of have to use them as an example. So, Calatheas, prayer plants, white fusion. And I'll tell you this for free, I've just been into a plant shop like an hour ago and there was loads of these for very, very cheap. I know, remember when you couldn't find them in the UK and they were very, very expensive. The average Calathea you can probably find in a supermarket, you can find in a box store these days. And the assumption that a lot of people when they're first starting off make is, well, it's everywhere. There's loads of them. It must be easy. And yes, I know. Before all the Calathea fanatics, because I do hear you, say that I found it easy. Yes, my comment back to that, and I'm assuming some people would agree, is not everybody does though. So, and these are plants that I think a lot of people that have the bigger collections find them really frustrating. Isn't just because they find them frustrating to grow in their collections, because this is the ultimate plant that puts new houseplant owners off plants, generally speaking. I mean, I could talk from personal experience from this. I have had people who literally have turned around and told me, oh, I don't do houseplants anymore. I tried, but I killed it really, really easily. And it was such a shame because it was so beautiful. And they don't even need to tell me. They can just start describing the plant. And I'm just like, you bought a Calathea because you saw it everywhere and it was super cheap and you assumed that it was going to be super easy to grow and you killed off what is arguably not a beginner plant, but you made the assumption, or the industry has given you that false narrative that it is an easy plant to grow. It is such a crying shame, such a crying shame. Because if they were just labeled, even there could be loads of them, they could be really cheap, that's absolutely fine, because obviously people are creating them and people keep buying them because they're really pretty. Look at how pretty the colors are. But at least give a warning to people. They're not going to because they can't sell the plants then. Give a warning and just say, this is not a beginner plant. Don't assume just because it's pretty that it's going to grow super easy for you. Give them that reality and let them make the choice, because there's a slight difference of somebody buying something like the White Fusion because they're seeing it everywhere and it's super, super cheap, and they are told, you know what, this is not the easiest plant to keep happy. Guess what's going to happen then? If somebody buys this knowing that, because they still want to take the risk, and they kill this plant, it won't put them off all other house plants. Or they won't just then turn around and say, oh, I don't have a green thumb, I can't grow any plant. Because they already knew going into it that this was going to be a tricky one. So there's that challenge accepted. But if I fail the challenge, it's okay. It doesn't mean I'm like rubbish. It means that this plant was too difficult for me to care. Better? Agree or not? The next big lie that we've all been told is that this is a new plant, it's new and it's new on the market. No such thing as new in houseplants. Really, really is no such thing as new. Apologies if you're hearing any kind of background noise. It is not just raining at the moment, I think it's about to start storming, so you might be able to hear all the raindrops at the top of the conservatory. But yes, when it comes to new houseplants, no such thing. I've kind of mentioned it before, and hopefully I'll take a picture and add it here of the book because I don't know where it is currently, but I'll give an example of a book. So Dr. Hussain's Houseplant Expert. It's one that Jane Perrone will talk about on her podcast, on the Ledge podcast, several times. And I know a lot of us do own this book and really enjoy it. And I think you've all kind of made that connection. For a lot of these new houseplants, they're not new. They were around in the 70s. They were around in the 80s. They were maybe really kind of more of the true kind of rare to the market plants, because there probably wasn't as much of a crazy boom as there is now. There isn't like a whole bunch of like content creators and influencers and all these things online telling you about all these new and different variants, but a lot of these plants have been around even back then. No such thing as new. I think I was talking with Jane Perrone when I was kind of as a guest speaker on her podcast, and she was mentioning, is it Georginanthus plant? That was a new big thing a couple of years back. It's not new. They were around back in the 70s as well. It's just that people forgot about them because they didn't stay front of mind like we might have with a golden pothos, with a Monstera deliciosa, which is everywhere and stayed everywhere. However, the one thing I will give you as a bit of a tip for free is finding some of these older books and seeing what the advice was for caring about those plants back then, where they didn't have all the fancy things that we had there now. They didn't have people talking about aroid mixers. They didn't have, like, you know, those kind of transparent back moss poles and all of these things, all of the newfangled toys that we have to play around with when it comes to growing these houseplants. And they had very basic things to play around with then because they were just handy and available. Have a look at that, because it might shock you to see it's just like, oh, something as simple as that will just work. It obviously worked back then. It could work now. I don't see why it wouldn't. Mind blown. And the final kind of lie that I want to touch on that we've all been told is, well, the truth to contradict the lie is there is no such thing as a houseplant. And before you switch off your brain entirely because everybody else has talked about it, yes, there's no such thing as a houseplant because no houseplant will grow naturally in a household condition, yes. But that's not what I'm saying here. Not all houseplants are meant to become houseplants. Not all tropical plants are meant to become houseplants. And let me elaborate on that in just a minute, basically. So there's a lot of these rare houseplants that we all get, and I've mentioned this on previous videos as well, and I will keep going on about this until it kind of sinks into everybody, that some of these plants, maybe they're better off just being left in nature. And whatever we might end up doing is not fully going to replicate the best conditions that that plant might need to survive. And generally in our little bubble of the world, when it comes to houseplants, even the rare houseplants, a lot of the times people are just like, why are we not seeing some new houseplants? See previous comment about new houseplants, but why are we not seeing new things coming on the market? First, they might have not had a chance to grow them ethically and not just poaching them from nature. But also a lot of the people that deal with kind of that early stage of kind of getting plants in to grow for the houseplant market will test out different plants. And I think I remember watching a very long time ago, it was either a YouTube video or maybe a documentary that they were talking to some of the growers in the Netherlands. And I can talk a bit more about that because that's closer. It's more on my doorstep than somewhere else in the world might be. But they were talking about their kind of research and development arm within their kind of little part of the world, where they were saying they get all of these tropical plants, different ones that maybe people haven't seen, and try to grow them in conditions that would mean that they could then create multiples of them and then sell them on, but may need to test out. And this process could take months, years, in order for them to figure out, is this a suitable plant to be a house plant? And a lot of the times, a lot of the plants that they probably test out don't make the cut, which is probably why we don't ever see them transitioning into a house plant, because the growers, the professional growers themselves, the commercial growers, have not been able to make it work in their conditions, which are more likely to be closer to that natural environment that that plant has. Or maybe again, even them, they'd be like, you know what, if this plant needs constantly to be rained on for 300 days of the year, the reality is not everybody's household is going to be like that. Very few people's households, or even if they wanted to get a different or more challenging plant, that is probably one step too far for most people to do that. So those things get kind of, they don't even come into our purview because they've already dealt with them. However, when it comes to certain other plants that might still make it onto the market and people are just like, why can none of us grow this well? It might be because even though it went through that research and development stage and it still wasn't testing okay in terms of ease of growth or kind of good enough and easy enough growth for most people to be comfortable growing it in their household condition. But then they're just like, this plant is so different looking and we know that people are going to love it. And an example of that would be during the boom of the Pink Princess, where as a lot of people were really kind of, it opened that plant, generally opened everybody's mind to pink on plants. And it was a thing, everybody wanted a pink plant. And like the obvious connection here with Calathea Lie and what was it, the pink Congo, ultimate like catfish plant. But again, that wouldn't have happened had the demand not being there for pink plants. So I'll give you a very hypothetical scenario. Those growers, they get a plant, it exhibits some pink, but it is stupidly difficult to grow. That plant might still end up in circulation. They might still try to grow it. They'll slap a huge price tag on it, tell everybody that it's super, super rare and sell it knowing full well that it doesn't matter what most people will do in their collection or in their growing situations. They will never be able to keep it happy, but they gave the people a pink plant, right? So not all houseplants, not all tropical houseplants are meant to become, not all tropical plants are meant to become houseplants, because you just might not be able to give the conditions. The thing that I've said in my previous videos, as I said earlier on, is the fact that maybe a tropical plant that you've got as a houseplant grows in Ecuador, but it grows in a 100-meter area of Ecuador, and that is the only place that it grows. Guess what that plant's going to need? The exact conditions that it's used to within that area. And some plants are more amenable. Some plants are just like, no, if I don't get exactly 301 days of rain and exactly 97% humidity all the time and no wind, because that's exactly what that 100-meter stretch of land or forest is getting, I will die a death super quickly. You're not going to succeed with that. So be very aware of that when you're looking at plants and plants that you might want to add into your collection. I am one that is maybe a bit less of a pioneer, and yes, I do get a lot of weird and kooky plants and maybe not a lot of people have seen it, but I won't actively go and find the plant that nobody has ever heard of before and that nobody's ever growing in, and there's one individual might have one of these plants and I'm going to be like, you know what, I'm going to grow that and hope for the best. Because you're taking a big risk there. I kind of want to see a few people that have bought this and they've got okay experiences from it before I say, you know what, yes, that plant probably does work as a house plant. Let's bring it in and hopefully, based on what everybody else is saying, I can kind of adjust the conditions to get it to a place where it's happy. But yeah, that's everything I wanted to touch. I didn't realize I was going to get so impassioned through this video or like quite so salty about it. But apparently these are things that have been kind of like working in the background of my mind and kind of going, oh, this is annoying. The ultimate tourist that keeps everything bottled up until eventually it breaks like a Vesuvius. But yes. Did any of these surprise you? Did I tell you things that kind of made sense to a certain point? Did I miss any? I am pretty sure I have missed a few here. Please do let me know in the comments down below. And I would love to do a follow-up video on this of kind of like truths that people might not know and lies that we've all been told about houseplants, a houseplant community, or generally just growing houseplants. But yes, Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.